And so thank you for recording, appreciate that. Before we get started, I just want to do a brief introduction of myself. My name is Haley Gray. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior at UC Berkeley, majoring in legal studies and minoring in ethnic studies. I've also worked as a legislative advocacy and policy intern at the Justice for Girls Coalition for a couple of years now. I started when I was in high school and I've been doing it throughout college. So I really have a lot of love for JFG and this event, and I'm really excited to be in this space with all of you today. And with that, I also just want to get the chance to know who all is here in this Zoom meeting and who's in this virtual space. So I would love it if you could all introduce yourself in the chat. Feel free to include your name, pronouns if you feel comfortable, your title and organization that you're representing today, where you're located, and your favorite winter activity. So just feel free to pop that in the chat and kind of read through so that way we can all get to know each other. Just to reiterate, my name's Haley. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently calling from Berkeley, California. And I think my favorite winter activity, every winter break since I was a kid, my family and we made up our own holiday called Shaka Khan, which is like a surprise fun day that we do where we stay in our pajamas all day, we bake cookies, decorate gingerbread houses, watch movies. And even though it's not a specific winter activity, it's something that we do every break. And so that's definitely a favorite tradition of mine for sure. So yeah, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and yeah, just let us know a little bit more about you. I'm seeing a lot of fun activities here. I'm seeing sledding at Gasworks Park. I've never done that before, but that sounds really, really fun. That sounds like a good place to go. I'm seeing a lot of watching movies. Ooh, going on hikes in the winter. I love that. Sounds a little chilly, but I feel like it would be really, really pretty to do that. Having a good cup of hot cocoa, a classic winter activity. Love that. Baking cookies, looking at Christmas lights. Oh, this is making me nostalgic for the holidays. I'm so excited for winter to come. It's one of my favorite times of the year. So I love hearing about all the activities and seeing all of the people that are in the space today as well. It's really exciting to meet all of you and yeah, just to see what organizations you're a part of as well. Alrighty, and we'll go ahead and feel free to keep introducing yourself, but we'll go ahead and get started with our land acknowledgement. Since we're hosting this meeting in Seattle, Washington, we want to acknowledge with gratitude that we're on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, a people that continue to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. Washington's colonial history, the theft of land, and suppression of cultural ways are fundamental causes of disparities in wealth and health witnessed in Indigenous communities here and across the US today. So we really want to make sure that we're taking the space to acknowledge that. And according to the Native Governance Center, it's important to go beyond a land acknowledgement and take time to consider actions we can take moving forward to support Indigenous people and nations. And so here on this slide, you'll see a link to the center's guide on going beyond a land acknowledgement and how to create specific actions that support Indigenous people and nations. So feel free to type in the chat as well which native land you're currently occupying. I'm currently on Ohlone land. And to learn a little bit more about the native land that you live on, you can visit native-land.ca. And if you're living on Duwamish land, we want to remind you that you can donate to Real Rent Duwamish at realrentduwamish.org. And on that website, you can learn more about Duwamish people and pay rent for occupying their ancestral land. So I believe Tristan will put those links in the chat for you all to visit. And now I would like to pass it off to my co-host Hoku to introduce herself as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hoku Nagamine, and I am currently a senior at St. Martin's University in Lacey, Washington. This was my first year working with the Justice for Girls Coalition, and I'm super excited. I've always loved doing social justice and advocacy work, and I am super excited to be here. Great. So just to go over some Zoom logistics and tech assistance. So please mute your mics, but feel free to share your video. And please utilize the chat feature as well that we have also been we've been using so far. This session is recorded as it should have popped up for everyone in the very beginning, and parts of it might be shared. So yeah, you can read all of these parts. You can enter your name, pronouns, and organization, which we've already done. And yeah, you can use the chat box to chat with Tristan specifically if you have any tech support or technical issues or questions or any of that. You can also use the reactions, which would be in the bottom of your screen, it should be. You can do little clapping emojis, thumbs up, whatever you feel like going doing. And yeah, to this this meeting, we actually have closed captioning available this year, which is super exciting. It's auto-generated though, so it might not be perfect, but yeah, so to enable that, you can click the closed caption button on the menu bar. And also just putting this out there, self-care is of utmost importance for everybody. So if you need to take a break, don't feel bad, take a little break. And then if you can come back, that would be great too. All right. So the overview for our session today. So we started at 1 p.m. We're just reconvening, going over community agreements. We're going to do an energizer. And then at 1:20, we're going to do a program spotlight on Amanda Rodriguez. At 1:30 p.m., we're going to do another program spotlight with Anna Duncan and Dominique Smith. At 1:45, we're going to do sorry.
Hoku, you're muted.
Okay, so sorry. I just realized you muted everybody. Sorry. Okay, so at 1:45, we're going to do some training with Lauren Carson, Black Girls Smile Incorporated. At 2:45 p.m., we're doing mental health youth panel with Natasha, Sarah, and Ty. And then at 3:15, we're going to close. All right, and back to Haley.
Yeah, so we would also like to take a quick moment just to reacquaint you all with our community agreements. Our first one is I statements, so just making sure that you're speaking from your own personal experiences and not on behalf of somebody else's. Listen, this is a very basic but necessary skill to use throughout this event. We want to make sure to actively listen to one another so that way we can learn more from each other and really be present in this space together. Our next one is confidentiality. So what's said here stays here, but what's learned here can leave here. Our next one is acknowledge your privilege. So recognizing the ways that you may experience privilege in this space and just in society in general. Our next one is kind of connected to that. That one is step up, step back. And so in addition to the other agreements, being sure to monitor your space so that way we can ensure that everybody who wants to share is able to share. And we especially want to give the opportunity for people who don't usually get spaces like this, the opportunity to share their voice and their experiences with us today. And our last one is literacy check or lit check. We want to make sure that this event is as accessible as possible, which includes language accessibility. So if you are ever unsure about a word or a term that we're using, please feel free to type lit check in the chat with that word as well. And we'll do our best to try to explain it and put that word in more context. So that way everybody is understanding what's being discussed here and feels welcome to participate in our conversations. And so now Tristan is going to launch a poll for you all. If these community norms sound good, feel free to answer to the poll and say that you agree with them. And if you would like to add anything, feel free to pop it in the chat as well. And so I'll just give you just a couple more seconds just to answer for the community norms to see if this sounds good to you or if there's anything else that you would like to include. Okay, awesome. Looks like we're all in agreement. We really appreciate that. And also we would just like to give a trigger warning before we really get into the content of this afternoon session. We want you all to be aware that we are speaking about pretty sensitive topics in this training relating towards violence and mental health. And so we want to remind you all to take care of yourself and feel free to take a break whenever you need, or even if you need to leave the session and come back. Just do what you can to make sure that you're prioritizing your own health during this session. And at the end of the presentation, and through email as well after the event, we'll provide you all with a list of resources that we can share with you to help you kind of process the different information that we'll go over during this session. And now we're going to move on to a quick grounding exercise before we get started. So we would just like to take a moment to kind of ground ourselves and our bodies through a stretching exercise. So if it is accessible to you and if you feel comfortable, please take this moment to stand up, but you're also welcome to stay seated as well if that works better. So if you are able to stand up, I just want you to take a minute, get yourself adjusted, and take a deep inhale and lift your arms above your head and stretch through that inhalation. And then exhale and bring your arms back down to your side. Now take a minute to grab one foot and kind of stretch that leg. Really take this minute to center yourself in your body and feel that stretch in your lower leg. Now you can switch and put that leg down and grab the alternate leg and stretch. You can put that leg back down. Now I want you all to kind of bend your knees and inhale your arms above your head once again. Really making sure that you're feeling that energy go through your arms, through your fingertips. And exhale and bring your arms back down to your side. Take a minute to kind of roll your shoulders back and relax a little bit. And roll your shoulders forward. And kind of take a minute to roll your neck as well. And take one final deep breath. All right, thank you all for participating. If you stood up, feel free to sit back down and get yourself comfortable again. Thank you all for participating. Yeah, we just want to make sure that we're just doing a grounding exercise to check in with ourselves and our bodies throughout this activity. And next, we also want to encourage you to engage in this interactive online puzzle as well. If you need a moment to de-stress throughout this afternoon, all Beyond Pink attendees can collaboratively work on a puzzle by visiting one of the following links on the slide. We do want to remind you all that the website only allows for 10 people to access the puzzle at a given time. So if you click on one of the links and you're unable to participate in that puzzle, or the puzzle's already been completed, you're welcome to check out another one as well. So that way you're still able to participate. And also just be mindful that visiting the link could potentially slow your computer down a little bit as well. So just being mindful of what your connection issues are looking like, and kind of checking checking in on the bandwidth of your computer as well. But yeah, feel free to access those puzzles at any time if you kind of just, need a little moment to distress a bit. And now I would like to pass the mic to one of our incredible board members, Amanda Rodriguez, to talk about one of Justice for Girls programs, One Girl, Better Systems. So I'll pass off to you, Amanda.
Thank you so much. Forgive me my beanie today, but I'm in a portable, and portable's kind of cold, but that is the work life of an education advocate. But thank you everybody for being here today. I am Amanda Rodriguez, the JFG board member, and I have served as a member of the One Girl Better Systems Task Force repping Yakima County for about a year now. The One Girl Better Systems OGBS project is a county level initiative started by the Justice for Girls Coalition of Washington State. Launched in 2018 in Pierce and in 2021 in Kitsap, Yakima, and Spokane counties, the OGBS project is driven by a cross-sector partnership of nonprofits, government, researchers, education, court, and politicians. As a catalyst convener and collaborator, we use a race equity approach and lens in our community organizing and participatory research. We are united in a common goal: to shape and implement solutions that support the success of girls at risk of court contact and prevent them from falling deeper into the court contact. As a collaborative across all counties, we have identified these top priorities moving forward. One of them being girl-centered race equity training. 2, girls advocacy skill development. And 3, navigating girl-centered services such as diversion, housing, mental health, youth development, and violence prevention. And I just like to add, as being part of the board, I have been really fortunate to be part of some really collective, wise, just really intelligent individuals, human-spirited individuals who love to be around people, working with youth, coming to a solution of how to make systems better, especially for our BIPOC community. I have been really fortunate to be around these individuals for the last year, just to see how important it is that everybody gets a fair chance when it comes to being able to be not just a survivor, but a thriver in success of life. So I just want to say thank you for all of you being here, taking the interest in wanting to learn more and how to be a supportive role in this work. But this is important work. And I know a lot of us on the board all feel the same way. And we're just really been excited for this training today with Tristan and Anmuno and the rest of the board members who have taken place, and to be able to start our coalitions within our counties, which is really important. So any of you that are part of those coalitions on this training today, I just want to say thank you as well for partaking in those conversations that we had, not only with families, but for youth. And so that way we can all not just teach about how to make systems better, but we are actually in the work of this together. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your compassion, your passion, because we all know sometimes that purpose leads us into our passion. And I believe that most of us are here already. So thank you for all of your work today. And thank you for being here.
Great, thank you so much, Amanda. So now I would like to introduce this afternoon's program spotlight, the CARE program. Here to talk to you about this innovative program is Program Operations Specialist Anna Duncan and Continuing Education Specialist Dominique Smith. Both Anna and Dominique work at the University of Washington's CoLab for Community and Behavioral Health. Please join me in welcoming them. And feel free to put like little clapping emojis or something.
Great, thank you so much. And can you all see my screen okay? Perfect. All right, well, just to begin, just want to say thank you so much for letting us be here. We're super honored to be in this space with you all and to share a little bit about this project that Dominique and I are working on. So we'll start briefly with introductions before we jump into our presentation. So my name is Anna Duncan. I use she, her pronouns. And I work at the CoLab for Community and Behavioral Health Policy. And for this project in particular, I get to spearhead our partner engagement and implementation work alongside my colleague, Dominique. And Dominique, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dominique Smith. I use she, her pronouns, and I too work for the UW CoLab. And my role as a continuing education specialist, but for the CARE project, it has been partner engagement and community outreach.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dominique. Yeah, we're super excited to be here, as I mentioned, and kind of the goal for today is to just share briefly about this new and exciting project that we have had the privilege of working on. It's called the CARE Project, which is culturally affirming and responsive mental health care for kids and families in Washington State. So we're just going to kind of share what this project is, how it came about, where we're hoping to go with it, and opportunities for involvement if you or anyone you know in your circles might be interested. And we will, I think, have some time for questions at the end, so feel free to just hang on to those or pop them in the chat, and then we'll get to them at the end. But to start, I just want to share a little bit about the project context, and I'd imagine that a lot of this is pretty familiar for most of you. So in our state, there's a high need for community behavioral health services, especially for kids and families. We have a really big workforce shortage, which means that a lot of therapists and providers are leaving the field or moving into private practice, especially in our publicly funded Medicaid system. This means there's a disproportionate impact on BIPOC families, and also a critical need for culturally informed behavioral healthcare services. So a lot of clinicians have named not getting training on this, not knowing how to provide services in a culturally responsive way. And then lastly, really thinking about how do we expand the lived experience workforce. We know that there are a lot of people who are doing behavioral healthcare work in their own communities, but may not be viewed as doing so because they don't have kind of traditional licensure. So this is kind of where we started, is knowing that this is the context and the landscape in our state and thinking, what can we do about it? So again, kind of briefly, just want to walk you all through how we got here. So in the summer of last year, our organization hosted 3 partner design meetings where we brought together a bunch of different community partners from across the state and asked them, if you had to pick one of the most urgent needs in our behavioral healthcare system for kids, what would that be? And they named that culturally responsive and evidence-informed care felt like the most urgent need for strengthening our healthcare system for kids and families. So with that kind of priority in mind, that this group came together and decided, we put together a proposal. It was submitted to the Washington State Legislature, and then it got funding for a year of project planning. So that's where we are right now. And I believe Dominique has shared our website in the chat. So feel free to take a look at that as we talk through it. And on that website, there is kind of a broader history and story if you're interested in kind of reading more in depth about how we got here. So in the end, in our proposal, we named 3 kind of major project aims for this project. So the first is really providing organizational support to all of these public behavioral health agencies and their leadership. So knowing that change has to come from an organizational place as well. Second, we want to develop a training strategy and a curriculum to increase culturally relevant and evidence-informed treatment. So actually thinking about how the care is provided to families. And then lastly, to support an expansion of the workforce to include non-master's level providers and lived experience providers who are already doing this work. So these are kind of the major 3 aims or goals of the project. So the way that we're going about this is through a process called co-design. And I won't go too in depth because there are a lot of different details and it looks different depending on the different projects. But in general, what this is it's a community-led participatory policy design process. So that means that we have pulled together teams and groups of folks from the community with lived experience in the behavioral health workforce, with lived experience accessing services, many folks with just general lived experience from across the state and saying, how do you define cultural responsivity in your own life? What does your lived experience look like? and how do we come together and bring a lot of different perspectives and information to build out a policy that's actually meaningful. Because we know that a lot of times things that are developed in academia or without community voice are not actually super relevant. So the goal of this is really having it be participatory, collective, and iterative process. So this is just a graphic kind of highlighting that there's this core design team that really is a group of about 10 people who are really moving this thing forward, along with a broader advisory team, and then an even broader goal of including as much public and community input as possible, which we'll get to in a little bit. So there is a 5-year project timeline. So right now we're in our first year. It really looks like, forming out the design team, recruiting as many folks as possible who want to participate. A big goal of our project is that anyone who wants to be involved and provide input anywhere in the state can. And so we're actively working on creating as many avenues for folks to provide feedback, to share their lived experience, and to provide input, because we really want this to be grounded in relevant kind of community lived experience, or else it won't be as effective. And so this is just kind of to highlight as well that part of our work and part of what Dominique and I do spend a lot of time on is building as many community partnerships as possible. We know that we're not the first ones to think about this, and we won't be the last. And we want to make sure we're not recreating something that's already been done. And we also want to make sure we're learning from folks already doing this work, learning what's worked, learning what hasn't worked, and ideally kind of defragmenting efforts to increase cultural responsivity in mental health care for kids. So this is a growing list, but one that, we're kind of always adding to and always wanting to build additional partnerships. And lastly, before I hand it over to Dominique, just wanted to share this goal that ideally in 5 years, where we want to be is implementing this culturally responsive curriculum at scale with all of our community mental and behavioral health care organizations that serve Medicaid families. So the idea is that a lot of times resources allow for a few pilot sites or in certain more higher resource areas, and we want to make sure that this is scaled up to our entire state so that anyone who wants to access these services can. And now I'm going to hand it over to Dominique.
Thank you, Anna. So I will be going over where we're at now in the project and how anyone who wants to get involved can get involved. So where we're at now, as I said, I'll be sharing opportunities for different forms of involvement for the CARE project. So Anna, you can go to the next slide. So this is how folks can get involved. This is a community-led project, so we really want to welcome anyone and everyone statewide, as Anna mentioned, who wants to get involved, stay involved, receive current updates on the project. We're excited to make impactful change, and we want to be as transparent as possible during this entire process. Next slide, please. So how you can get involved, one way is our community sounding board. And as Anna mentioned, that is the co-design team and the advisory team. And they're meeting regularly, they're planning and starting to build out these design curriculums. And we're wanting to get as many people involved as possible. And so here are just some options if you're curious or if you know of anyone else who may be interested. So we do have a community sounding board. The time commitment is low. It's about 30 minutes per month. It's a lower form of commitment and a way for you to be able to stay involved. And what that will look like is we'll send email prompts, surveys, and then this data gets brought back to our design teams. And so if you're interested in signing up and joining our community soundboard, that information is on our CARE website. Next slide, please. Another way that folks can get involved is to become a project amplifier. We're asking organizations who already serve youth directly to help us spread the word and let folks know statewide what it is that we're doing. And so for organizations who would like to be our project amplifiers, we'll send out a monthly toolkit with a blurb and direct links to our websites for you to share out via your listserv, newsletters, sending direct email messages to those who may be in your network that you think should also know about this project. Also, for our project amplifiers, the CoLab will spotlight those organizations who partner with us and the work that they're currently doing in the community on our CARE project website. Next slide, please. So other forms of involvement, if you don't have the capacity to join our community sounding board, that's totally fine. Or if you're not an organization who has the capacity to be a project amplifier, you can still sign up individually or your organization just for regular updates. We really want to respect your time, and we won't send more than one weekly update out at the most. And we'd love for you also to be able to follow us on Twitter at the UW CoLab. We tweet updates about happenings in our lab, current events, and we like to share out community resources. Next slide, please. So our project value and reciprocity. We're building partnerships with organizations, and while we're doing that, we really want to make these relationships intentional. And so our goal has been and is to continue to build out intentional long-term partnerships as we're all doing this aligned work together. Next slide, please. And connect with us. You can contact our project team. We'd love to hear from you, answer questions. You can reach out to myself or my colleague, Anna Duncan, who is our program operations specialist. We thank you for your time today, and we hope that it was time well spent. If there are any questions, we'll gladly take those.
I have a quick question while people are thinking of theirs, if they have any. So your goal of having these health centers, are these going to be physical sites where folks can go, and or are you going to offer any mental health services as well, remote services?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So these are going to be, so the idea with this project is we're going to be developing out like curriculums, organizational support, and strategies that will be used in already existing behavioral health organizations. So it will be funneled through kind of sites that, yes, folks, where they would normally go and get their behavioral health care through the Medicaid system. The idea is that the services provided will be enhanced, shifted, using a different curriculum, having different organizational strategies to provide services that are more culturally relevant and effective, ideally. And in terms of the telemedicine piece, I think a little bit of that will depend on how this all gets rolled out. So there are it's a bit of a gray area right now because so much is dependent on how our design team actually develops this out, which is the cool part of co-design, but it also leaves a lot of questions around what it will look like. If I had to guess, I would imagine that a lot of these, in the same way that a therapist can provide telemedicine support, that a lot of these strategies could be used in that way as well. So that would be my best guess. I don't know, Dominique, if you have any other thoughts on that.
That's my prediction as well. I guess we'll just have to see as the project progresses what it'll look like.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So we've been hearing a lot in recent years about co-design and why it's important. And I know that there's been a push in recent years to implement a co-design measures. And I'm curious to know what that process has been like for you so far, how it is engaging with the youth. Because I think the idea is that there's no hierarchy, right? So you're not sort of like, you're all in the same playing field. They bring their lived experiences and they help shape the curriculum alongside you. I'm just curious to know what that process has been like, how you've been finding, you know, these people to work with. And I'm sure other organizations are kind of moving toward this direction, so they might be able to learn a little bit from your experience with.
Yeah, great question. And Dominique and I have the pleasure of getting to help facilitate and kind of sit in on the co-design meetings. So I don't know, Dominique, do you want to take this one, or do you want?
Yeah, I can take this one. So this is my first time participating in the design process. And as Anna said, we get to help facilitate and sit in on these meetings and watch all the magic happen behind the scenes. So I've only been to, I think we only had 2 meetings so far, but like we've been doing our value mapping and guiding principles, and just how this all came about, just doing as much community outreach as we could and reaching out and getting that lived expertise, as well as, you know, those who are in the behavioral workforce. It's a pleasure to be able to sit in on these meetings and really hear community members, all their different aspects, their experiences, their reflections, and where they'd like to see the project go. So as a newcomer who is just learning about the co-design process and being able to watch it kind of all fold, I've enjoyed the process. I really enjoyed it, and just learning as we've gone.
And one other thing I'll add, that, you know, co-design is a bit of a nebulous concept, and I think every organization does it differently. But kind of, and Dominique had mentioned this, that the way that we do it at CoLab tends to be in kind of a 4-phased process. And so it starts with value mapping, which is really, before you can do anything, you need to build community and rapport and connection and trust. And so there's a lot of kind of discussion within the group around, like, what do we value? How do we want to see these values show up in the final product that we design together? How do we make sure this is a safe space? What are like kind of group norms? Because the idea with co-design is bringing together a lot of different people with a lot of different perspectives, and then having them bridge those perspectives, their own experience in work and lived expertise, to build a policy together. And so it's a facilitated process. Ours is externally facilitated because CoLab is also kind of has a stake in this process. And so then it, then moves into kind of information gathering, which is pulling in different forms of knowledge and evidence that get pulled in along with lived experience, and then going into like beta testing, piloting out a model, and then eventually implementing it out in the real world. So that's a very brief overview of kind of what that process looks like.
And we have a couple of questions in the chat. One is directly related to the co-design process. Erica asks, during this process, do you compensate the participants for their time?
Yes, everyone is compensated. That was a very important part of this. And a big piece of our budgeting was just ensuring that everyone's time is compensated. So yeah, thanks for that question.
That's great. Super important. And then Michelle asked, is there a piece of the project looking at universities and how they're recruiting or removing potential barriers to training mental health providers, particularly recruiting potential providers who have lived experience to increase the numbers of providers in the community? Also working in conjunction with BHOs. I'm not sure if this is relevant or appropriate.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just taking a moment to read through the question again. Yeah, so I guess I can jump in, and then Dominique, if you have other thoughts, please jump in. So to answer the question, are we working in conjunction with behavioral health organizations? So the answer is yes. We have a broad network, and we're also currently doing outreach to gather more behavioral health organizations, providers, and leadership into this process. So making sure that, you know, folks who are directly providing services are involved. I will say, I think we definitely are thinking about how there are barriers, obviously, to training mental health providers, and also how we determine who a mental health provider is, and whether or not, especially around like credentialing and degrees. I don't know that I have a full answer to that, but that's something we can definitely get back to you on. We aren't focusing as specifically on kind of the university relationship to that. But it's definitely something to think about and a really good question. I don't know, Dominique, am I missing anything or anything you want to add?
No, I think you answered that perfectly. I was just reading, I see another question from Ms. Erica Weems. During the process, we are compensating the participants for their time. So like community sounding board members, for their first reflection, they received gift cards. And so everyone will be compensated for their time. Our co-design and advisory members, they are all compensated for their time as well. But yes, there is compensation for community sounding board members. Hopefully that answers your question.
These are great. Are there any other questions for our lovely presenters? And I will obviously be sending out their contact information too, if you think of anything else. Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you being here, and I'll pass it back to our youth facilitator to keep us going.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much, Dominique and Anna. Wow, what a great program. You guys are doing such meaningful and important work. And yeah, I wish you both luck in all of your research. And yeah, I just don't know what to say. It's really nice to hear that you both are doing this work. And now we will extend a warm introduction to our fabulous trainer, Lauren Carson. Woo! We can do claps in the chat. Yeah. So Lauren is an Atlanta native and University of Virginia alumnus, currently pursuing a master's in social innovation at Agnes Scott College. Lauren is the executive director and founder of Black Girls Smile Incorporated, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting positive mental health education, resources, and support. Through her work with Black Girls Smile Incorporated and as a mental health advocate and speaker, Lauren has been featured at SXSW, Clinton Global Initiative University, American Psychiatric Association, Refinery 29, Redbook, and Hers Magazine, and made Young Nonprofit Professional Network 30 Under 30. Lauren continues to lend her voice and platform to mental health awareness and empowerment of all, especially minority communities, women, and girls. Please join me in welcoming Lauren. Woo!
Hi, everyone. Give me 2 seconds to share my slides. So excited to be with everyone today. Okay. Can I just get a thumbs up if you guys can see my slides? Okay, awesome. So as mentioned, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I should probably take the 30 under 30 off though, because I'm actually over 30 now. But it was a very nice, it was a very nice award, and I was definitely under 30. Well, I am very excited to be joining you all today. As mentioned, I'm the executive director and founder at Black Girls Smile, Inc. Our main mission, our core values really focus on empowering the mental health and well-being of young Black women and girls. And today we're going to be talking about tangible ways of supporting the mental health of Black female students. This is also FEM identifying as well. and then really looking at the suicide crisis that has been identified specifically through research over the last few years, that young Black women are completing suicide at higher rates than other demographic groups. So sit back. I promise we will focus on the positives. We will focus on action, but very excited to be meeting with you guys today. So a little bit more about me kind of outside of my bio, just so you understand the lens through which I'm providing the information and the content today. So I identify as a daughter, granddaughter, a sister, my sister under me. I'm the eldest of four, and my sister under me just had her first daughter this week. I'm a niece, cousin, friend. I'm a mother of two now, which has my head spinning a lot of the time. A partner, a wife, nonprofit leader, speaker, went to UVA. And something that also is very important about myself and my story and the lens through which I speak and provide information and see the world is I have lived experience with clinical depression, anxiety, and two suicide attempts. So the objectives of today will really be honing in and hopefully get a better understanding of some of the risk factors and statistics that impact the mental health and well-being of African-American female students. Also identifying some of the cultural considerations that impact Black female students and techniques that we can use to empower them. And then what it looks like to actually implement these strategies and make sure that we are holistically focusing on Black women and girls thriving in the world. So I promised it would be fun, but I also have to provide, I have to provide the information. So as I mentioned earlier, the suicide rates among young Black girls have been increasing for quite some time. We've known for at least the last decade that young Black women between the ages of 13 to 19 were showing higher rates of self-reported suicidal ideations, which is suicidal thoughts. And in a journal that came out in 2019, research really kind of teased out that suicide rates among Black girls between the ages of 13 to 19 had increased over 182% between 2001 and 2017. And just to kind of give you guys a little bit of context, suicide rates among all youth have risen. Suicide rates among Black youth have risen significantly. But why we are honing in on this specific demographic is honestly, this one size fits all model is not working. We've got to start looking at the ways that we can empower the mental health and well-being of each individual student. And that means looking at some of the intersectionality in their identities and some of the risk factors to make sure that we are providing them safe, protected, comfortable, authentic environments where they can truly thrive. And this is a quote soon after the Olympics, Simone Biles. We probably all heard a lot about her story. There's others like Naomi Osaka, but there's a common thread here that Black women and girls, we are seen as talented, genius, but we are also used up by institutions. And in many cases, forgotten about when we are the ones in need of protection. And this goes into issues around adultification. Many times people don't know what adultification is, but this quote speaks to that. In many cases, young Black girls are seen as women and are seen through, research has shown, are seen to, are in need of less protection from advocates, from educators, from those that should be standing up for them. That in many cases, we're finding that there is bias there. There's implicit bias in feeling like young Black women are not in need of protection. So some of the additional statistics that I've already mentioned, we see high rates of suicidal ideations among young Black women. So youth identifying, that's normally the ages of 13 up to 18 or 19. We also see higher rates of racial trauma, sexual violence, gender violence. All these things are related to trauma. Trauma has definitely started to widen our scope and thinking about trauma and traumatic experiences and the ways that we can support those who have experienced trauma. We also have to, again, be aware of some of the risk factors and knowing specifically that young Black girls are more susceptible to experiencing various instances, persistent, one-off, that can lead to trauma and thus impact many areas of their life. We also, it's worth noting, so I'm providing all these statistics, okay, we have an issue. But candidly, it gets even more complicated because you find that young Black girls and Black women are not seeking treatment. They're not feeling like they have adequate spaces, adequate resources, that they have the financial means to actually get the help that they need to heal when it comes to mental health difficulties and issues. We see higher rates of depression. And I added the bit on here about high achievers, and we saw this in the last quote, is too often we just look at who we identify as problem or those that are kind of othered. We also need to look at those that are high achieving, specifically among young Black women, because we find in many cases they're experiencing a lot of pressure in the home, pressure from their friends, pressure from coaches, pressure from educators, and this expectation to be great. This expectation to even at times be representative or tokenized. So wanting to, again, make sure that we're not just looking for some of our more obvious signs that a young person is struggling, but also looking at those that may look like they have it all together. Those you find very often are what we call, or what has been coined, as high achievers or even high functioning. And I spoke briefly earlier about adultification, but I feel like this image really breaks down what adultification looks like. And in many cases, people will hear the term adultification and they're like, that's not happening. It is. Statistics have shown that educators are more likely to have harsher punishments in an educational environment for a young Black girl compared to a non-Black girl for similar behaviors or actions, or so the reprimands are disproportionate in many cases. And this also goes to the ways that at times young girls can be sexualized. We are too often creating rules, especially in the educational environment, that are geared towards stopping behaviors from a specific demographic group. And in many cases, that's young Black girls. The length of their outfits, the way we wear our hair, the specific things, colors, it can vary. And in many cases, it feels very targeted. And these are things that can definitely impact the mental health and well-being, self-esteem, body image, but it also impacts the ways that young women interact with adults, feeling like adults don't understand them, feeling like adults are not going to protect them, that they don't feel like they have an outlet. And if anyone's familiar with youth mental health first aid, one of the big things that youth mental health first aid talks about is how having one adult, just one adult in your life as a youth, can be a protective factor against suicidal behaviors, against mental health difficulties, and severe longevity of symptoms. Is just having one adult in your life. So if young Black girls are feeling like that adults don't feel like they should be protected, that they're being disproportionately punished, that they are being even sexualized by adults, even in a joking manner, they're not going to feel like that is a safe and protected environment. And many of us, if we do work in a school system, if we do work with youth, we do want to create a safe and protected environment for all those who we interact with. And that means not just looking at sweeping ways to do that, but also looking at, are we framing reprimands that are going to other someone, that are going to impact the mental health and well-being, or are we specifically targeting someone? Thinking about those things can really help to address adultification that is implicit but also kind of that unconscious bias that at times we all have. So next, we're going to briefly talk about some of the stress factors. So what kind of goes into some of the statistics that I've just outlined. We talked about adultification. Adultification can be on both sides. So that can also look like a parent who feels like they need to stop a child from doing something because they're moving from a fear-based parenting. So if we are parents or we are a part of a tribe of individuals that help raise young people, we also need to look at what it looks like to parent from a mindset of liberation. And that can be quite difficult, especially when we're parenting Black youth, but it's really crucial to making sure that they have positive and healthy development. We also see issues around cyberbullying. There are a lot of different techniques that can be utilized to ensure that we're staying on top of social media content, social media interactions. And it is not too much for parents, for adults, for caregivers to be involved in the social media that your young person is engaging in. We also talked about trauma earlier, and complex trauma, if anyone's not familiar, complex trauma is going to be a combination of multiple different traumatic experiences that a person has had. We also see higher ACEs scores, and then there'll be a beautiful talk later about those caregiver roles, those family responsibilities. We see a disproportionate rate of young Black women having those responsibilities in the home where they're helping cook, they are helping with siblings, they're helping with household activities. And, while we may think, oh, those are just chores, in many cases, we're finding disproportionate pressure that's put on young people, specifically Black girls, when it comes to caregiver roles and responsibilities in the home. Academic pressures, also worth noting things around media representation. We don't always see the best representation of Black women and girls on television, movies, books. We're definitely starting to see an increase of positive representation, and we need to continue to trend in this direction. But when we do find that young people are coming across an adverse or negative image of Black women and girls, let's address that head on. Let's have conversations around this. How did it make you feel? Do you feel like this is accurate? Just having insightful, intentional conversations with our young people to really address some of these stress factors and risk factors, because all of these are not easily teased out by a survey. This comes from having conversations, consistent engagement with the young people in our lives. So I'm going to stop talking for a moment. And I just want to pose something to the audience, to the group. How do you believe that some of these statistics that we've talked about could impact Black girls in a school environment? And if you don't mind putting responses in the chat. Push out, definitely. And if anyone's not familiar with push out is complex, but in some ways simple. Young people are not feeling like they have safe environments to learn. And in many cases feeling like they are alienated from educational settings and being actually pushed out. So feeling like they don't have a place there and actually either dropping out of school, criminalization, entering the justice system. There's all different ways that young Black women at times can be pushed out and also feel like they're being pushed out, leading them to disengage. Yes, it's very common where I'm providing a training to, let's say, teachers, and they have this aha moment of like, oh, if this student has to take her siblings to school, make them breakfast, get up in the morning, then, she's helping her siblings with their homework, getting them all settled. Then she's coming to class and she's falling asleep during my class. Maybe she's not disengaged from the work. Maybe she's not being rude or disrespectful, but maybe she has other things going on. And that's why it's really important to look at the whole girl. We are a part of that, right? Like, we are advocates. We are We are part of the ecosystem that encompasses Black girls, and finding ways where we can speak to others, find out what's going on in other classrooms, other classes, extracurriculars, all of that can help support the well-being of the Black girls that we work with. Disproportionate punishments, detentions, dress codes, burnout. Yes, these are all ways. And just imagine, like, if you're dealing with all of these things at once, it's going to be really hard to thrive. And thriving in various ways. That could be thriving in, yes, push out film in the book. Please encourage everyone to check that out, especially as an educator. Honestly, if you want the book, send me an email. Black Girl Smile will send you these books because they are so crucial to making sure that our young Black women feel safe and protected in school environments. So next we're going to talk about ways to empower and support Black female students' mental health. So we're going to talk about informal and formal strategies, how we can advocate and empower and have empathy with some of our considerations, and then what it looks like to provide resources. And lastly, which is so important, is really modeling what it looks like to focus on our mental health and well-being. So first, I just want to provide some key considerations. I am very action-oriented, but I also feel like you should know your audience. You should know who you're working with so that you can maximize the interaction and the engagement. So first, confidentiality is quite an issue in the Black community. There is a lot of skepticism around interactions with authorities, and that's not just always law enforcement. It's not always individuals that are in the justice system. That could be being afraid to share things with a teacher because you're afraid that it's going to be reported. It could be, being afraid that it'll be reported to authorities, being afraid that it'll be reported to parents. So making sure that there is a conscious way of addressing confidentiality could be very important. And with that, I am not advocating that anybody say, if you tell me something, I'm not going to tell anyone. In many cases, we are a mandated reporter. So providing some information about what it means to be a mandated reporter, just really focusing on the student. And that goes to the second point, person and student centered. All of us as adults, it is very easy for us to talk about us, for us to say, hey, well, you're very upset about a breakup. Well, this is what I would do about it, or you'll get over it, or I've been there. And while those things can be helpful at times, we want to make sure that, to the third point, we're leading with empathy, but we're also focusing and centering on the student and their experiences and what they are experiencing. Next is creating space. Space is quite a buzzword, and I love that it's a buzzword. It's a beautiful buzzword because it means so many different things to different people. The context in which I am saying creating space is making sure that you are creating an environment that feels safe, that feels comfortable, that feels non-judgmental, that feels like it's being led with love and empathy and light. And those are if we come with that sentiment, that is us helping to create space. But it also means being okay with silence, being okay with someone thinking, being okay with setting boundaries, but making sure we are creating this space where a young person feels comfortable opening up about the things that they may be experiencing. And they may not want to do it on the first time, but being consistent and just letting them know that you were there if they do want to share can be really key. Non-judgmental, indicating mandated reporting, but also looking at what the parental involvement needs to be, should be. We want to make sure we have those considerations. And I know that at times it can feel like, okay, well, these are the rules of my school, or this is the rules of my district. I'm not telling anyone to thwart those rules, but we also have to consider what do those rules make sense for this student. And that's what I mean about not using this sweeping, like this is how it just should be, and this is how we're going to handle situations. But if we find that a young girl is experience some sort of trauma at home, alerting her parents may not be the most helpful next step. So making sure we have an idea of what that looks like legally, what that looks like in regards to our rules, but also what it looks like for that young person. And then lastly, and this is quite important, is making sure that we're addressing any stigma. I put it here, I didn't focus super heavily on it. I may have some slides that focus heavily on it later, but for a very long time, stigma has been kind of touted as one of the biggest issues to Black people getting help. And while stigma is an issue, things are changing and there are other barriers to getting help, and stigma also has to be looked at more in depth. It could be stigma around sharing something with your family, but also feeling okay to seek help yourself. So that may be more generational stigma, cultural stigma. There also may be personal stigma. So looking at, again, that high achieving population, I remember being in undergrad and needing help academically and feeling like I am a high achieving Black young girl, young woman. I can't ask for help. That's not what we do. So thinking about stigma more in depth and also looking at it based on the specific situation, and again, looking at the whole girl. Apologies, guys. Of course, I get a tickle in my throat in the middle of a presentation. So wanting to look at some of the informal policies and procedures that you can implement. Things like mental health days. A lot of us are very quick to say, oh, we're sick. Well, creating a more inclusive environment that is comfortable talking about mental health and well-being and centering our relationships and our work around mental health can call for us implementing things like mental health days and not having to stigmatize, not having to hide the fact that if you're having a sick day, it's really a mental health day. Also having mental health check-ins. You can get super creative with this. For my team, and depending upon the situation, sometimes you need to be more intentional and targeted with mental health check-ins if you know that someone is potentially experiencing a crisis. But again, you can get quite creative. So with my team calls, we have a little Beyonce grid that has different pictures of Beyonce, and I ask them, which Beyonce are you feeling today, based on your mental health and well-being. I've seen people do number scoring, but you can get quite creative, emojis with doing mental health check-ins. Also having something like an open door policy. And that means if anyone's ever, been in a work environment where someone says, okay, I have an open door policy. That doesn't always necessarily mean that the person's door is open. But again, they've created that space to say, if you need something pertaining to X, Y, or Z, or in general, my door is open. I'm a person that you can come to. So what it looks like to create some open door policies where young people know, okay, Mrs. Berry she has said at the beginning of the year that if I'm ever struggling with my mental health or well-being, I can go to her. Implementing self-care activities, also implementing breaks. That may be 2 to 3 minute stretching break. It may be a little meditation break. And then also avoiding last minute or high pressure tasks. I know a lot of us thrive under pressure. And in many cases, that's what it means to be human and also what it means to be female. But we don't always have to thrive under pressure. That can create a lot of anxiety. Chemically, it can definitely impact your body. It can impact your hormones. So if there's any ways that we're in a role where we can avoid last minute or high pressure tasks, that can be really helpful. And then the last one, and a lot of people really like this one, is having a mental health keyword. We as a society are still working to destigmatize conversations around mental health and mental health difficulties. Maybe implementing something like a keyword where if someone's struggling with their mental health or well-being, they can say that keyword and then X, Y, or Z happens. So let's say you are an aunt and you've told your niece, hey, if you're ever struggling with something, just text me pineapples. And you know, when you get that text, that means that I need to check on you, or that means that I need to send you a motivational quote. It can vary, but having something where you have a plan in place ahead of time. And speaking from experience as someone who has struggled significantly with depression and anxiety and suicide attempts, my family wasn't always equipped because we didn't have conversations, and my friends, my loved ones, when I was experiencing a mental health crisis, because we didn't have things in place. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know the best ways to help support me. But what I've done is to be really proactive about letting them know what that looks like when I am healthy and well, so that when I am in a crisis, or I'm having a bad day, or I'm having a bad week, that I am able to go to them, and we've already kind of talked out what are some of the steps or the resources and ways that they can support. Some of the formal policies, again, mental health days. This is seen to be a very helpful. I know it's been piloted extensively in New York, is implementing something like mindfulness or meditation opposed to detention. And they've seen amazing boost in academic performance and decreases in detentions and suspensions that went out for students. More mental health professionals on site. Just keep advocating, like advocate. Reach out to organizations like Black Girl Smile, other organizations, so that you can get the resources that you need within your settings. More resources for students, putting those up in the classroom, putting them up on the door, providing them, maybe on the first day, things like that. And then again, addressing adultification, but we can address adultification not just from a mindset perspective, but also looking at it from a policy perspective. What are things that can be done to decrease the adultification and the policies that that kind of push along adultification within our schools and environments that our young people are within? And someone mentioned earlier the book Push Out. The same author has a book that really speaks to educators and the ways that educators can create a safe and healthy environment for young Black girls to thrive. Next is going to be advocating, mentioned earlier, parental involvement, making sure that there's teacher or educational professional collaboration. So again, let's talk among teachers. If we see something going on in first period, let's talk to the other teachers that young person has to see, maybe they're not telling us what's going on, but maybe they're closer to another teacher, so that we know what's going on, so we can all work together to support that young person. Appropriate reprimands, creating space, empathy around personal and societal experiences. There's a lot that goes on in the world. Even this week, last week, there are big things that are happening that are impacting people in different ways. And that's where kind of, again, that buzzword triggering comes into play. There's things that don't necessarily have to happen to us directly for us to be impacted that can lead to something like secondary trauma. Those are instances where we haven't necessarily experienced a trauma, but we still are showing PTSD symptoms as if we did experience it, because we're seeing it, we're hearing it, we're reading about it. These are things that we don't want to necessarily dive away from, but make sure that we are providing support. And specifically, if you identify as non-Black or even non-female, there's still ways to support a young person. There's still ways to have these conscious, intentional, supportive, loving, empathetic conversations around things that may not affect your demographic group personally, but in fact impact society, impact the young people that we work with. So don't necessarily shy away from these conversations, but just lead with empathy. And then making sure that we're using non-judgmental language in everything that we're saying. And if we don't always say things right, just back up, apologize, use things as a learning and teaching experience. And again, just focus on centering how can we support the whole girl. I next wanted to briefly highlight some of the mental health resources that are available. Some places we may be looking, we're not looking yet. But common resources in schools or within districts, in various educational environments, that's going to be your counselors, your social workers, your psychologists, even your school nurses. Also looking at mentors and advocates. So like that could be coaches, it could be teachers that oversee school clubs, after school programs, but other places that we can look for resources at times, depending upon where we're looking for them, or what resources we're looking for, is things like our insurance resources as well. There's a lot of things that we have access to that at times we don't even know about. Various organizations such as Active Minds, Jed Foundation, Black Girl Smile, Sister Afia, these are organizations that focus on young people, but also looking at informal resources. So that can be extracurricular activities, peer support groups, that could even be group therapy, online supports, but just making sure that, again, we're getting creative, we're advocating. These are the things that we need to do to make sure we are supporting the young people that we interact with. Next, I want to talk about what it looks like for you to take care of yourself. One of the best ways for us to empower the mental health and well-being of anyone else, but especially young Black girls, is to model what it looks like to have healthy and positive mental health habits. So that can look like things like setting boundaries, admitting faults, apologizing when appropriate, prioritizing mental health and well-being, finding ways to delegate responsibilities, especially if you are a female or femme advocate, really showing the young girls in your life what it looks like to not take everything on, especially if it's a Black woman or girl. The need to take things on just kind of gets passed down. And in many cases, institutions, systems are aiding in that. So what it looks like to kind of stop that, and set boundaries and start to delegate. Asking for help, saying no, finding ways to exercise, to move your body, meditation, mindfulness, and I mentioned earlier, taking a break. So again, a lot of talking, but I want to just take a pause and just reflect on this polling question. What are the ways you can support the mental health of Black female students? We've talked about some of those ways. Is there anything specifically that kind of resonates with you? If you could put some responses in the chat. Someone said, letting them know we are here for them and support them in achieving their goals, acknowledgement, advocating for parental involvement and teacher and educational collaboration, centering their experiences. I love that. Providing space and stepping back to give them time to process, talk, and hear from one another. I love that. Thank you guys for sharing. Any others? Any ways that you can support? Learning how to step back and create boundaries when you have the capacity. Yes. Feels so simple, but creating space. There aren't enough spaces curated just for Black girls. So true. So true. Community building and engaging with other organizations. Yes, I love that. Connect them with resources, help them through the process. Yes, all great ways. Thank you guys. And I would encourage you to keep thinking about this. Ponder ways that you can support the young Black women that you work with. And then a few other cultural and gender considerations that I just wanted to highlight. Things around personal space. This isn't as much of an issue post-COVID, but people are starting to get closer. So making sure that we're respecting personal space. One of the things that I do now when I greet people is I ask them, do they feel comfortable hugging? Do you feel comfortable with a fist bump or a hand, high five? Last week, I asked people if they wanted to do Wakanda, just making sure that we're creating space for people to start out interactions and engagement with honor and respect and setting boundaries and knowing that they can feel comfortable setting boundaries and letting you know how they truly feel and experience things. Stigma around mental health. We talked earlier about various traumas. what it looks like to access resources, who feels comfortable accessing resources. Very often I will work with teachers or educators and they'll say, okay, well, I provided the resources to the parents and they didn't want to use it. Okay, well, maybe we need to back up and address like, where are some of the issues around accessing resources? Why would a parent potentially of a young Black girl be hesitant about accessing resources? Maybe it's because all the resources that I'm listing don't really have people of color, or don't have people who identify as Black or female, or maybe they feel that they can't afford those resources. Like, what are some of the reasons? Because in many cases, there are reasons that there is an aversion to getting help and accessing support. Historical context around relationships and medical community. Again, if you candidly, if you do not identify as African-American or Black, I would highly encourage you to, at some point, take some time to educate yourself on the complex relationship that the African-American community has had with the healthcare system. There are reasons that a person of color may be hesitant to access resources. And it's not as simple as to say, oh, well, this happened 20 years ago. This happened 50 years ago. These are things that run deep, and these are things that need to be addressed. So we may need to make sure that if we're referring someone, let's say we're referring a student somewhere, let's maybe call ahead of time and get an understanding of like, who can I direct them to specifically that will resonate, will be able to work with, has experiencing working with young Black women and girls. How warning signs and symptoms potentially show up differently. Too often, the warning signs and symptoms related to mental health difficulties are kind of sweeping as well. Warning signs show up differently in various demographic groups, different people who have different identities that are very prominent for them. It can show up differently. Specifically speaking about Black women and girls, you find often that psychosomatic symptoms can be quite prevalent. And what that means is we manifest some of our mental health issues within our bodies. So you'll hear things around muscle tension, backaches, headaches, things like that, gastrointestinal issues. And in many cases, we're going to our doctors and they're treating that, but really there's an issue around anxiety or depression or PTSD. So making sure that we are aware of how different demographic groups, and specifically today talking about Black women and girls, how warning signs and symptoms show up differently. You may see things like anger and aggression, or things like an attitude, and a teacher, an educator may take that as defiance or disrespect, but in all actuality, maybe they've had other teachers that have really violated them, have said, remarks, have treated them in such a way that they do not trust educators. So it may not be an attitude or disrespect, but a fear, a protection. So making sure that we're looking a little bit deeper at what some of these interactions could look like. And then I think it's always important to highlight some quick supports as well. Like, what are some things that you can do in the short term? The first domino, as I like to think of them, is like, if I take anything from this, what can I do today? That can look like highlighting current resources that are available. I may be taking some time out to create something in Canva, or to make an announcement in class that really highlights, look, we're getting closer to the end of the year. The holidays are amazing for a lot of people, but sometimes the holidays can be very triggering for others and can be a very difficult time. Maybe highlighting some of the resources within your school or your community can be really helpful. Mental health days, check-ins, online trainings for leaders within your institutions, breaks, speaker series, but also finding ways to highlight mental health days and months, because that really starts to normalize and create a culture where you're creating a community around focusing around mental health and well-being. Additional resources that I wanted to highlight. The crisis text line is a great resource to provide young people. If the young people in your life are anything like the young people in my life, They are more apt to text than call. We have a keyword with the crisis text line, so you can text SMILE. Their main one is home. If you text that to 741-741, you'll receive a crisis text counselor, 365, 24/7. We also have the National Suicide Hotline that has recently been changed to just 988, but also having an idea ahead of time of any local mental health hotlines, ACT teams. And then I also encourage people, call 911. If you or someone you know is in danger of hurting themselves or others, that is one of the best resources that we have right now. And there are a few things that I advocate to do when you're engaging with 911 specifically, is letting them know that it is a mental health crisis, letting them know that the person is nonviolent if they're nonviolent, that they do not have a weapon, and even asking if they're able to send someone out who's gone through some sort of mental health training. As I mentioned, with a little bit of trepidation in my voice, is 911 is our best resource right now. And that means that a lot of the calls that they get are related to mental health issues and difficulties. So a lot of local municipalities, larger cities, localities are starting to train their officers in things around mental health and mental health crises. So it's worth at least asking if they're able to send someone out who's gone through some sort of training. Some last nuggets that I want to share before I open it up for questions is race and gender are really closely linked when it comes to mental health seeking behaviors, attitudes, and outcomes. Cultural and gender specific nuances can lead to things like misdiagnoses. I have, I can't tell you how many times I have spoken to a friend or a colleague or a friend of a friend who it is years later after the first onset of mental health difficulties or an illness that they get the correct diagnosis. And that goes back to a lot of the things that we've talked about. Things are very sweeping, and we've got to start to move away from that model and really start to focus on the person and starting to treat the symptoms, provide the help and support that is really needed to make sure people are healing, recovering, thriving. Also really important that body image and self-image are largely impact the mental health and well-being of Black women and girls. That again goes to representation, that goes to cultural nuances and stigma. There are a lot of things that go into what it feels like, what the experiences are as a young Black woman and girl. Black women do not feel that they can be vulnerable. This goes to multiple things that we've talked about earlier: self-stigma, adultification. But these are things that we can start to break, and we can help be a part of breaking those thought processes, those stigmas, those issues that are really keeping young women from getting the help that they need so that they can truly lead mentally healthy lives. Black girls and women are taught in many cases to take care of themselves before others. That is something that is just kind of passed down. It just trickles down. Even as I told you guys, I am not 30. I'm not under 30 anymore, but even in my mid 30s, like, it is something that I'm constantly examining in my life of these things that we just unconsciously fall into based on society, based on culture, based on our ancestors that kind of push us in a way of doing things. And we have the ability to say, no, there's ways to honor that, but I want to do something different. And one of the biggest ways to ensure that Black girls and women are mentally healthy and well is to take away that notion that we need to take care of others before ourselves. Also getting away from just focusing on resiliency. But resiliency is a big part of the reason that we do thrive, the reason that we do seem magical, the reason that we do glow. But we also, and I have loved the soft Black girl movement, because resilience is not candidly all it's cracked up to be. Resilience has been linked to strength, has been linked to, again, that non-protection, but looking at ways that we can help Black girls thrive and be resilient, but also still honoring their experiences. And then the last thing that I want to remind you guys is Black girls really are magic. It is a saying, but it is also very true. And any ways that we can help elevate this and embody this, help bring this out in the young Black girls that we work with, it is crucial because there are so many things that try to take these girls down, to make them not feel like they are worthy, not feel like spaces are for them, that they should be where they are. So ways that we can pour into them in positive and healthy ways is very, very, very important. And really our motto at Black Girl Smile is making sure that we all smile. So this is the last slide. I want to open it up for questions for you guys. But thank you so much again for creating space with me, for learning a little bit more about Black girls' mental health and well-being, and ways that we each individually and collectively can work on curbing issues around suicide and mental health difficulties among Black women and girls.
Thank you so much, Lauren. This was such an incredible presentation. I felt like I even learned a lot more about myself and how I respond to different issues. And I just really appreciate you bringing that to light in this space and talking about intersectionality and the nuances of a Black identity, and just really having a very holistic understanding of what it means to be a Black girl or a Black woman today. And I really appreciate you sharing that. And I would love to see if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask Lauren, or anything else that they would like to comment on.
Thank you, guys.
Lauren, can you come talk to our girls advocacy group?
Of course, of course, of course.
Haley and I were DMing and we're like, oh my gosh, this is so inspiring. I mean, Haley and I had like a lot of conversation like during this. We're like just thinking about how we, you know, how I as an adult can model better behavior. We had a little chat about deadlines and how everything we've just been taught to like perform under pressure. Like that's when you're supposed to be at your peak, and how that's really toxic. And it's not good for your mental health. It's definitely not good for the people around you to create those like that urgency. And it's really not centering, you know, mental health needs above all. So we're excited. Haley and I are gonna.
Yeah, one of the other ones that I've really been working on this year is not multitasking. I was at a conference once, and they did this little activity where they had you write like 1 through 20, and then you like matched it up to colors. And like one way you did it was you did number, color, number, color, number, color, and you timed yourself. And then you did it a second way where you just did the numbers and then you did the colors. And you cut the time down by like 1/3, like 2/3, just not multitasking. I was like, wow, this whole time I thought I was doing so well multitasking. And honestly, I have been wasting my time.
Doing a bunch of things poorly instead of one thing really well. That's what I'm guilty of. No, that's amazing.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I kind of have a question. So you had kind of talked a little bit about how Black women's mental health can manifest in their bodies as well. And I was just wondering if you had any ideas on practices to kind of almost like reverse that effect, or whether that's like meditation or yoga, or just kind of how to unlearn that. Because I've definitely noticed that a lot growing up, or even like I'll have like, you know, like teeth grinding or a clenched jaw, and just kind of feeling that stress
that
and
tension.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm just curious, like how you kind of have been working to unlearn that, or different exercises that you kind of do centered around that.
Yes. So a few things. One, I would say it's really big to do body check-ins. Like we're very quick to ask ourselves like, oh, how are you feeling? Some of us don't even do that. I'm guilty of that as well sometimes, of like, oh, well, how did this make me feel? Like, that is why I acted out. I didn't like this. Like, I didn't even check in with myself. But also doing body checks as well. Like if you find that, let's say, you know, you had a call with someone and you're just like, oh, I just, you know, didn't really enjoy that. Like that wasn't a good call, right? Take a second to think about like, how do you feel? Like, do you have muscle tension? Do you like you said, are you clenching your jaw? Are you, you know, where are you holding your stress? And the more that we can get in tune with where we are holding our stress, our trauma, our pressure, our anxieties, the more we can get in tune with that, the more we can pick up on and start to curb that. So for instance, for me, I get headaches. When I'm really stressed, I get headaches. And for the longest, I was like, oh, I'm just not drinking enough water, which I think as humans, we on a whole don't drink enough water. But I was always thinking that I wasn't drinking enough water. But what was really happening is I was having these adverse experiences and I was just like moving on. I wasn't even acknowledging that I was having these adverse experiences. And really, it was impacting my mental health, but then it was starting to impact me physically. So now, as soon as I start to get headaches, I'm like, oh, okay, I know what's going on here. Like, let me evaluate, like, what's going on. Maybe I need to journal about some things. Because the thing, like, to your question is like, okay, in many cases, something has already happened for us to experience, like, you know, tension, or it could be something that's coming up, right? But what are ways that we can then act? So one, checking in with yourself, and then journaling, practicing self-care, or really leaning into positive and healthy coping skills. I found that I can lash out at times when I feel anxiety or stress. So I have to take a second to, you know, check in with myself. And then from there, I implement some of my positive coping skills. Some of my positive coping skills are things around, you know, gratitude. Like, what am I grateful for? You know, what am I grateful for with this situation? How can I have that mindset shift? Can be really, really helpful. So those are some of the things that I do to really check in on some of those kind of like psychosomatic things that can impact our mental health and well-being. And then the last thing I would add is I think it's really important to like know what's happening, because too often we will go to the doctor and they will say, oh, okay, well, this is X, Y, or Z is happening. How long has it been happening? You're like, you know, it happened like twice, but I'm not really sure. You know, if you're experiencing some symptoms, like write those down. Just write a few sentences down so that when you go to access resources, you can be really specific about what's going on and what you need. To say, oh no, I've been experiencing this for 2 weeks. Was experiencing this and then also we start to pick up on the patterns too. Because we'll start to pick up on, oh, I don't feel good on Fridays. What's happening that I don't feel good on Fridays? You know what I mean? Like, is it a meeting with a specific person? Is it something I need to address? Like, what's going on where we can start to pick up on patterns? But we also can provide that information to any professionals, any outside assistants that we work with as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That was really helpful to kind of just be able to reflect on that a little bit more and even think about the ways that I can advocate for that for myself, and just, yeah, figuring out doing those body checks. I feel like I've done the mental health checks, but haven't really thought about thinking about the physical impacts as well. So I really appreciate you bringing that to light and, yeah, kind of sharing your own personal experiences that as well. Are there anybody else in the space that has any other questions that they'd like to share with Lauren?
Hi, I had one question. This is Erica Williams from National Creighton, a research associate. I was just curious, what age range do you work with, and are they only students that you collaborate with?
So we work with 13 to 25. So we consider kind of that youth and the young adult. And then we also do some work with parents and caregivers as well. And no, we do not work just with students. So we have a really diverse network and community. We offer programs virtually, and then we also offer programs in person as well. We really focus on a few things with Black Girl Smiles: education piece, support, and then resources. So for education, we're really focusing on educating Black girls about mental health and well-being, so increasing mental health literacy. What I found, and what I'm sure a lot of us can resonate with, is like things happen in our life and we don't even think like, oh, that has to do with my mental health, or like, oh, that would impact my mental health, or that is a trauma, or this is why I'm showing up this way because it's impacting our mental health. So really educating Black girls on like what mental health is, that it's not just mental illness, common warning signs and symptoms and things to look out for, but then what does it look like to really focus on coping skills and self-care methods. So we really focus on like, what are the things that we can equip young Black girls with that they can take with them always to focus on their mental health. And in many cases, that's arming them with resources, that's internal resources, external resources, encouraging them to find more resources, create those resources. And then also making sure that they're self-advocating. Self-advocating is one of the biggest things that each and every one of us can do when it comes to making sure that we're mentally healthy and well. If we're not telling, if we're not in tune with what we need, and we're not going to get it, but also if we don't tell people what we need, we're not going to get it either. So what does it look like to help equip young Black women with these conversations with their elders, with their ancestors about, you know, not just going to church to focus on your mental health or well-being, what it looks like to help connect them with providers of color, what it looks like to provide financial support. So we really try to focus on making sure that we're just equipping these Black girls with as many resources as possible to ensure that they stay mentally healthy and well.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. Again, we really appreciated having you in this space and you just sharing all of your wisdom and expertise. This was a really, really great portion of our event. So we're so thankful to have you. And in addition to all of the resources that you shared, JFG also compiled a few of our own that addresses issues relating towards health, mental health, and as well as resources for victims of violence and substance abuse. So in addition to Lauren's resources, we'll make sure to share these all out to you in a follow-up email as well. And now we just want to let you all know we're going to take a short 5-minute break before our youth panel. We'll reconvene around 2:48, but feel free to grab some water, get a snack, go to the bathroom, stretch, anything like that. But we would just really appreciate it if you could still stay logged into the Zoom meeting. But yeah, we'll just take a quick break before our next panel. Thank you, and we'll see you all soon. All righty. Hi, everyone. Feel free to come back into the space from your break. Thank you for staying logged on. We really appreciate it. So our next portion of our event is to do a youth panel from our mental health youth panelists. So I would love if you could all help me welcome joining Sarah Khan, Natasha Colombo, and Tai C. These extraordinary ladies are all a part of the Yakima chapter of our Girls Advocacy and Impact Network, also known as GAIN. GAIN is a program that's been in fruition for a couple of years now. In this program, we do virtual meetings to teach students about self-advocacy and legislative advocacy as well. The beginning of the year is more so focused on discussing values and talking about relationships and personal image and self-image, self-worth, things of that nature. And then throughout the year, we kind of transition to discuss a little bit more about community advocacy and talking about our impact in our environments and our community around us. And then towards the end of the program, that's when we get a little bit more involved in legislative advocacy and having our youth members even engage with testimony, submitting bill comments, connecting with state representatives, and things like that. So the goal of this program is really to build up personal confidence and advocacy skills within our youth members and just give them a platform to discuss issues that impact their lives and that they're really passionate about. This is probably a program that I really love in JFG, and it's one of my favorite things that I've been able to engage in at my time at JFG. So I'm really appreciative of having these youth panelists here with us today. And I'm really excited for you all just to learn a little bit more about their personal experiences and just what their journey has been like in the GAIN program. And I believe we have one panelist that'll be joining in momentarily, but before then, we can just get started with introductions on our panelists, or for our panelists. So Ty and Sarah, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves, you could say your name, pronoun, what grade you're in school, and tell us one thing that you'd like to do for fun.
Hi, my name is Sarah Khan. My pronouns are she, her. I am a junior in high school, so I'm in 11th grade. One thing I like to do for fun, I like to sing. I'm in choir in high school, and I like to sing in my free time and obviously, yeah, in school.
Hi, I'm Ty C. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior this year. One thing, well, I feel like I'm kind of copying Sarah a little bit, but one thing I like to do for fun is I play in this, not only school band and our YBC jazz band, but I have my own band, and so I like to play in that the most. So that's my favorite free time event.
Love that. Thank you both for sharing. And when Natasha gets here, we'll make sure to do an introduction of her as well. But I'll just pass it off to Hoku for now, and we can go ahead and get started.
All right. Hi, nice to see you both. So I'm just gonna head right into the questions. So the first question that we have is, how did you both get into advocacy and why is it important to you? And what issues are you most passionate about? So either one of you, whoever wants to answer first.
I can go first. So the GAIN program, which GAIN means Girls Advocacy and Impact Network, talks about issues like mental health, how to advocate in school, how to advocate in your community, racial equity and anti-racism. And those are all issues that were really important to me. And even before I joined GAIN, I was passionate about those issues. I got into advocacy actually through GAIN. I didn't know the true meaning of advocacy before I joined GAIN. And once I did, I started realizing that advocacy isn't as difficult as people might make it seem, and it isn't as like intimidating and scary as like it might sound, and it's really easy and you can do it in your daily lives. So that was another reason why it was important to me, because anybody can advocate, and that's kind of what GAIN taught us, that you can advocate in your community, you can advocate for yourself in larger groups. So that's something that was really important to me.
Thank you, Sarah. Oh, hi, Natasha. Should we have her introduce herself?
Hi, I'm so sorry for being late. My name's Natasha. I use she, her pronouns, and I go to West Valley.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Our first question was just, how did you get into advocacy and why is it important to you? And then also, what issues are you most passionate about?
I got into advocacy because I'm really passionate about issues generally pertaining to equality, like racial and gender equality. And I'm also very interested in the legislative system and like how it works. That's kind of what I want to go into career-wise. And so it just seems like the perfect fit for my interests.
Okay. I'm glad everyone's here now. So for this question, why advocacy is important to me. I kind of always been this real confident kid, I guess. But I experienced this like surprising, I feel like when I was younger, I didn't understand why I was experiencing like this bullying, not from kids, but from parents, because I was this little blue-haired, like real loud and outspoken kid who would talk about like LGBT and women's issues. And I experienced kids saying, well, my parents don't want me to be around you, or you're a bad influence because, you know, you're gay, or you're this, or you're that, and all of these things. And for the longest time when I was a kid, I didn't understand what I could do about that and what I would, if I was able to change anything like that. And so I remember being introduced to like the women's marches or the movements of that time, and going to a women's march here in Yakima and meeting so many wonderful advocates and realizing that we can do this and you have the ability to get into this. And they're handing out pamphlets to all of these youths who had no idea. And so I feel like that was one of my first introductions to the fact that you can get into advocacy, but obviously I had no idea where to start. So when I was introduced to GAIN, like 3-4 years ago now, I'm not sure. I was like, oh, wow, okay. And I remember going to the first meeting being like, this is exactly the kind of thing that will help me do what I want to do. And so GAIN, like Sarah said, Girls Advocacy and Impact Network, kind of was just like the first step, and the rest is history. And the issues that I really am passionate about has to do with mental health. And that's been my biggest one so far. I've testified on 2 bills, hopefully another one this year, related to mental health sick days, and then related to the in-school health center, so 1834 and 1225. And I hopefully in the future and now would love to work on any LGBT related ones, but you know, they're few and far between when it comes to here. But as a future sociology major focused on public policy, this is something that is definitely pivotal for me. So sorry for talking so long.
No, don't apologize at all. I really appreciate you all sharing. And that actually, Ty, really helps segue into our next question. So in this past legislative session, Justice for Girls advocated in support of House Bill 1834, which added mental health as a list of excused absences, or as an excused medical reason for students' absence for K through 12 schools in Washington state. And so I'm curious to hear from you all. Why do you feel like that bill is a step in the right direction? And how do you think that that will kind of change the way that mental health is talked about in schools?
I can go first. So I think that it really helps destigmatize talking about mental health. I think among adults especially, there is sort of a taboo around mental health, and that it's all in your head, and that it's not as severe as like the youth might make it seem. And I think that having this bill passed helps normalize our mental health conditions, and like normalize the fact that this is real life. Like, people are affected by these conditions every single day, and it can affect them physically. It can really, it can really like change their lives. And so it just kind of normalizes that fact and makes it, I guess, more serious and kind of debunks the whole stereotypes around mental health. So it really just helps destigmatize talking about mental health.
Here, I could go. So this is one of the bills that I testified on, 1834, and I worked on a lot of stuff with this, and especially, I guess, for me, I found it so interesting because I have definitely needed a resource like this. But I mean, how many times can you count when you just were feeling awful? It wasn't because you were sick, but it was something else and you just didn't have a reason and you couldn't lie. And it's just all of these things. And not only had I experienced this, but I gave a I got interviewed about this testimony, and I talked a little bit about to Crosscut magazine. I talked a little bit about how the people in my life were severely affected and how people would just say, I can't do this today. And my family doesn't validate this, and the people around me don't validate this, but a school, an education system, a place, an institution where you're at for so long validates this problem, then it becomes something more real. And it becomes something that the school then is allowed to understand how many students are going through this. It allows them to assess the amount of mental health resources they should be administering to students, especially when they were, if they were or were not previously. And so it kind of gives reasoning behind those absences, and it gives them statistics then that can kind of allow them to not only help to stigmatize, like Sarah said. I mean, that's such a perfect point. And it allows them to not only do that, but kind of visualize their student body. And so I thought that was just a wonderful bill. And I don't know, just very important to me.
I totally agree with Sarah and Ty's points. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that mental health is just as important as physical health. And if you're mentally unwell, just like being physically unwell, you're not going to be able to function at an optimal level in school and be able to do all the things that you need to do like throughout the day. And so by having these, you will get more of a chance to kind of fill up your battery and be present in those moments that are necessary during school and education, where you're required to operate at a high level. And you shouldn't have to feel like guilty or stigmatized or have to like lie about the reasons why you're missing school. It should be normalized that it's just as important as your physical body and that it needs to be taken just as seriously. And so it kind of brings to light these conversations and validates these experiences that are very prominent among youth in Washington and everywhere, especially since COVID. And so I think that it's a very important bill and that lots of students are benefiting from it.
Yeah, very, very good answers. So I think we can all agree that mental health is important for everyone, of course. But I wanted to ask you three, why do you think it's important? Why do you think it's particularly important that we center the needs of girls' mental health? And when I say girls, I mean, of course, not just cisgendered girls, but trans girls, non-binary youth, and all other femme-identifying youth.
Well, even before the pandemic, girls in Washington were more likely than boys to experience at-home emotional abuse, anxiety and depressive feelings, attempt suicide, be bullied at school, and a lot of other issues. And COVID kind of increased poor mental health outcomes for girls, especially girls of color. A lot of reasons for this is girls are expected to kind of be the caregivers and to be gentle, and they can't do that if they're experiencing mental health issues. So they kind of feel this guilt inside of them for experiencing them. And girls of color, the resources available to them can be very limited, especially if they don't have people that they feel understand them around them. And so I feel that this it's particularly important that we center the needs of girls' mental health, because their opportunities are less to get help, and their feelings are commonly invalidated in society, and it's important that they know that they have an outlet or they have something to turn to.
All right. I totally agree with you, Sarah. I thought that was very well said. And I feel like especially for us three in places like Yakima, resources are sometimes few and far between, or it's it's kind of like an obstacle course to get what you need. And using myself as an example, I knew I wanted to get counseling or therapy for a real long time. And it's taken about 7 months to even get a referral. This has to do with my insurance, or this has to do with openings. There's not enough people here. There's not enough people who take your insurance, no matter what it is. And we find ourselves kind of at a drought sometimes, or at a standstill for resources in the Valley here, and I mean everywhere this is experienced. But I kind of think especially here we find ourselves often belittled, and like there's a lot of outspoken men, and there's a lot of men in power positions here that kind of don't seem to understand why this is a problem. And this is not saying that women are more important than men. That's not the point. It's bringing women up to a point where it is that equality, and it is that the resources are equal for everyone. And especially one thing that a statistic that I liked was according to the CDC, emergency room visits for suicide attempts rose by 50.6% for teenage girls during the pandemic compared to 3.7% for boys. And so there you see, even when people are at their home and when they're away from public, it just gets worse. And it is not addressed when those things get worse, because it's women are seen to, women and gender nonconforming people are supposed to be complacent, and you're supposed to deal with it, and you're supposed to just kind of have that emotional stability, quietness, and not have to speak about these things and not be outspoken. And so I feel like raising up girls and gender nonconforming mental health is something that is very, very important, no matter where you are, small town or not, because these girls are not being heard and they're not being listened to.
Yeah, Ty and Sarah, that was so good. And yeah, I completely agree. I guess like piggybacking off of Ty and like statistics wise, Washington, or the nation, in fact, recommends about one school psychiatrist for every 500 to 700 students. And the state currently only employs one per every 1,000 students. So the students in schools aren't getting enough attention as it is. And so they need that outlet. They need these kind of bills and like opportunities to be able to get the help that they need. And there's not, like Ty said, there's sometimes, a lot of the times, there's not enough resources for them. And so that plays a big role, and that especially falls on girls. And in rural places of Washington, like Yakima, for example, you have to travel a lot farther to get the care and the help that you need, or to go to, like fancy medical or therapist centers that you would get in bigger cities like Seattle and stuff like that. And that really affects girls in these rural areas. And so I think that it's important to look at it through more of an intersectional lens, because in any of these issues, the minority groups are going to be more affected. And in this case, girls are definitely more affected statistically and socially as well.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing that. I really appreciate you touching on that intersectionality and like the importance of making sure that these policies are girl-centered or racially equitable, and just how we can, address the needs of different people based off of their identities and their own experiences. So thank you all for sharing that. And the last question that we have is, what are some ways that adults around you, such as teachers, parents, and community members, can support your positive mental health and well-being?
For one, they can expand telemental health options for BIPOC girls. So girls in rural areas of Washington, like Yakima, for example, need to travel farther for care. So telemental health options would be extremely helpful and would make that a lot easier. I was actually part of I'm not sure what to call it, a group called Hope Healing and Health Collective. It was JFG actually got a grant from, I think, the National Black Women's Society for if they had a youth leader and a youth mentor, who in this case was Tristan, join these meetings, and basically the youth would talk about reasons, barriers between them getting mental health help. And it was BIPOC youth mainly, but they would talk about why they needed mental health help and the barriers between getting it. And one of the things that we said was the cost of mental health services is a huge barrier for youth and their family. Like Ty said before, a lot of the times people don't take your insurance, and then you have to pay out of pocket, which is just a huge cost. And so reducing the cost of mental health services would be a huge support. And instead of reaching out to mental health professionals, sometimes youth of color can turn to their friends and family members, and they can have various experiences and outcomes, which are sometimes negative. Sometimes the friends and family members can fuel their feelings instead of helping them. They can feel like they're burdening them. And so validating the feelings and experiences of youth of color that are seeking out mental health resources must be prioritized for youth to feel comfortable reaching out. So that means like putting up posters around the school, or having hotlines around the school, or talking to students, making sure that they're okay, talking to parents and making sure that they know how to deal with these issues. So those are just a few ways that adults can support youth when it comes to mental health.
This specific thing, I testified on a bill related to in-school health centers, and I thought that specifically could be something utilized when speaking about adults and healthcare providers and teachers, parents, because it involves all of them. Which that bill passed, and I worked on a grant review board where we looked at, proposals from different health centers, and reading these proposals and looking at the information from them was so promising, because it was these groups of adults and these groups of workers who created a space for kids that was like, the numbers, I mean, in my opinion, were staggering, because you have at least hundreds of visits from kids who either were uninsured, they didn't have the money to seek an actual healthcare provider, and the opportunity to go to a health center in school was exactly what they needed. So something like that in as many schools as we possibly can do. I mean, you can't have it everywhere without funding. So as much as possible is a wonderful, wonderful resource. And I think that if we can get more grants, if we can get more health centers, if we can get these resources and professionals in schools, especially for these kids, I think that's great. And I think that we also, we had spoken about this in a GAIN meeting actually, how we should better educate our teachers, because so much of the time problems are instigated by the teachers, which is something that you don't want to think that your teacher is going to be like giving you some unfair treatment in comparison to other students based on either a minority status or a gender status or anything of that kind. And so not only de-escalation trainings, but things that just have general views on open-mindedness and maybe just taking a step back and learning about self-awareness, because I feel like we often feel that teachers can maybe have certain biases, which is something that no student wants to feel. And so having teachers that go through that, but also the teachers who feel like they can provide things like that. So at our school, West Valley, we had Janae, our Spanish teacher, who was in charge of a similar club to GAIN, but called Synergy. But having not only clubs like that, but teachers who are open to talk about those kinds of things and issues is a great way to have kids feel like they're heard. And so we just need more. And one statistic that it's not about youth, but I think it's still relevant from National Alliance on Mental Illness, is of the 410,000 adults in Washington who did not receive mental health care, 36.9% was because of cost. So I feel like we can apply that to youth as well, because every adult was once a youth. So that just hits back at health centers and teachers and people who are accessible.
Yeah, so in the same line as kind of people that are accessible, I think like really investing into the safe people that would be in the youth's lives, like parents and caregivers and teachers and community leaders, investing and educating those people, that will definitely help trickle down into these systems, and they can be advocates for youth and youth mental health like policies and advancements. And so with more education and funding and investing into like community services and stuff like that, this will definitely help solve a lot of these problems and create more safe spaces. And I think addressing the trauma and the experiences of especially youth of color in a gender responsive and more culturally competent way, that is a better approach than just kind of like a one end all be all like approach to mental health. And so I think that, again, with the idea of intersectionality, when it comes to these conversations, like different people groups and different minority groups experience these things differently. And so you have to acknowledge that you have to, because they experience things differently, you have to address them differently. And so that ties along with education, like learning how do we address these particular issues, because everyone is different, and especially every people group experiences things differently. And so being aware of the implications of that is extremely important within this discussion. And that's totally some ways that adults can help make the youth and girls especially feel more comfortable and support mental health services.
Great responses. Wow, you are all so like well thought out and well spoken and just so educated on these topics. Like I know you guys are, but like every time I hear you guys talk, I'm just thinking to myself, like, wow, I probably could have taken over the whole world if I knew as much as you guys did when I was in high school. But now we're going to open the floor to any questions from anyone else in the audience or in this group session. So feel free to use the chat option to pop your questions in there, or you can also go down to the bottom and hit reactions, and then it's going to have like a feature to raise your hand. And yeah, so feel free to have questions for our youth panel. All right, so a question for you three. I'm so sorry if I don't say your name right. Markieta Marks, I think, right? Says, what challenge do you all have? What challenge do you all have for us?
Here I can go. First thing that comes to mind is, like Sarah said right in the beginning, advocacy is so much more accessible than anyone thinks it is. And it is right there. You can sign up to testify. You can send in a comment. There are bills right there and you can read them and you can look at them and no one tells you and no one ever lets you know. So I feel like a challenge is, if there are youth in your life or there are people in your life who care about things, yourself included, you go tell them about it. Like, go ahead and look. If you, I don't know who's in Washington where everyone is located, but look up your local House bills, look up what's happening in your community and let people know that they can do that. Because I feel like the first step is just being aware. And so letting people know, letting yourself know is so important.
Yeah, totally. I think that it's like everyone's kind of civic duty to like advocate for these things. It's really important work. And I also think as well, a challenge that I would say is like, just be like introspective, like kind of think about like, how do I view mental health and what is like what are some of the like biases that I would have about like mental health, especially among youth, like, oh, it's just because you're a teen, or it's just because you're going through like this particular thing, like you're moody, like it'll go away, like kind of addressing those things and leaving introspective into kind of the way that you view these things and how it could be different for other people outside of your experience.
I unfortunately have to leave, but thank you so much for listening to all of us and to me, and I really enjoyed this conference, so thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate you coming here. Does anybody else in the audience have any questions for our panelists? I'm not seeing anything. Oh yeah, I'm not seeing any questions. I'm seeing a lot of praise in the chat, so make sure you all go and look at that. But thank you guys again for participating in this panel. I feel like I love working with you guys, and every time I hear from you, I feel like I really learn so much, and it's just really inspiring to see how you engage in advocacy and how you've grown over the years. So yeah, thank you just for sharing that with us. And we're just really grateful for you being a part of the JFG community. So thank you again. And now I'd like to close out our panel and pass the mic off to JFG's incredible program director, Tristan Eddy, to close out this year's summit.
Thank you, Haley. Can we give some love to our panelists? Let's give some hand rubbing, some vibes, some emojis, love in the comments. I had goosebumps the whole time. Can you believe these youth? Can you believe these youth? Wow, that was incredible. I'm so jazzed right now. Like I feel like I need to go run or something. I don't like running. So thank you so much for attending, everybody. This was such a beautiful day. I love Beyond Pink because we get to convene, and I know it's sad that it's digital because we don't get to be physically in a space, but we have 69 cities represented today, and we had over 230 people register for this incredible day. And so I hope that you all were able to see the keynote this morning or the trainer this afternoon or our panelists. And I hope that you will all take back some delicious nuggets with you that will help you in your personal and professional work as we all go forward as girl justice advocates. I would love your feedback. So I put a link in the chat. This is a 3-minute survey. It helps us so much. JFG is committed to understanding our reach, and in our as we advance through our diversity, equity, inclusion metrics, we're trying to gather more data about who attends our events, and we would love to hear from you. We want to know who's here, what we can do better next year. So please just open it right now, and you can have it in the background to do. I'll also send it out after we're done here. But we just really value and appreciate your feedback. So I very much appreciate you filling out the survey. And with that, I would like to extend my absolute deepest gratitude to the following people who made this day possible. I would like to thank Dr. Camille Quinn for her incredible keynote this morning, and for Lauren Carson for absolutely blowing it out of the water with her training. I would like to thank our incredible youth panelists, Natasha, Sarah, and Ty, for courageously sharing their experiences with us. I'd like to thank the JFG board members whose collective efforts guide our mission forward. In particular, I'd like to shout out Sammy Alazada, Amanda Rodriguez, and Sarah Veely for going above and beyond to make this day happen. I'd like to thank Maddie Sandoval, Anna Duncan, Dominique Smith, Julia Kagochi, and Nathan Fowler for providing us with some incredibly innovative program spotlights. I also want everybody to show some love, show some emoji reactions, put love in the chat for our youth program and training specialists, Amara, Jaya, Haley, and Hoku, who never cease to amaze me with your profound dedication to ensuring that JFG is truly youth-led. What incredible young people we have in this organization. We are so, so lucky. And not last, I would like to thank Anne Muno, JFG's executive director, who is such a visionary leader. She brings passion, she brings dedication, she brings thoughtfulness. She is authentic in the way that she guides our organization. And so I always love the opportunity to get to shout her out and thank her so much for everything that she does for Washington State girls and gender expansive youth. We love you, ma'am. And now, last but certainly not least, thank you to each one of you for your tireless efforts to center the needs of girls in your work. You showed up today. You care, and that is so important and so needed. And we've heard it from our youth, we've heard it from our panelists, we've heard it from our speakers. Just by showing up today and every day for youth, you make a huge impact, and we are so, so grateful for the work that you do. We're working together to do this. We're working side by side. We're hopefully one day going to achieve our goal of collectively dismantling systems of oppression, eliminating injustice, uplifting girls, and ensuring that youth thrive in your communities and in Washington. So thank you for attending the summit today and being Girl Justice champions. And my favorite thing, I think it's one of my favorite things that I'd like to do is take a picture. And it's weird because it's Zoom and it's weird, but before we adjourn, I want to get just a quick screenshot of your faces. If you don't feel like turning on your camera because this is a recorded event, you can keep your camera off, but you can throw an emoji reaction up, which is really fun. So I'm going to stop my screen share here. And hopefully I'll be able to see everybody in gallery mode. Yes. Okay, so feel free to turn on your camera if you want to. And if it's the first time you've seen your face all day, you look beautiful. And if you'd like to do a little emoji reaction, I'll give you a countdown and then I'm gonna take a screenshot. All right, on the count, no, I'll count down from 3. All right, everybody ready? 3, 2, 1, cheers. Beautiful, I love it. All right, that's all we have today. I'll be following up with you via email. I'm so grateful that we get to be in community with each other. Be nice to yourself, be nice to others, and we will see you next year at Beyond Pink 9.